Um, Good morning to everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Vishwas Satka. I'm the chairperson of the Cooperative and Policy Alternatives Center. COPAC is coordinating and leading the Climate Justice Charter initiative in South Africa. We are doing this integrally and as part of the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign. The Food Sovereignty Campaign was formed in 2014 out of a Right to Food conference in South Africa. And since then, we've been trying to make the link between one of the worst droughts in our history, the food crisis, and the climate crisis. It's been a difficult journey. In 2016, we put a coffin full of coal in front of the Gupta estate, and we called for the phasing out of coal. But of course, nobody listened to us. In 2017, we put together a People's Food Sovereignty Act to make the case that we need a new food system that can handle worsening climate change. We took that to Parliament, and of course, nobody listened to us. In 2018, the UN IPCC put out its most important scientific study, raising the alarm bell very loud about the dangers of climate change, the 1.5 degrees Celsius report. We called on the president of South Africa to convene an emergency sitting of Parliament. This was supported by a range of organizations in South African society, but of course, nobody listened to us. So despite all of that, we have not given up the struggle to affirm climate justice in South Africa. And it's in this context that last year, we had very, very engaged conversations with constituencies in South African society. We sat together with unions to understand what they want for a just transition. We sat with social justice organizations to understand how do we connect with climate and environmental justice. We sat with young people and children and tried to work out their concerns and aspirations and so on. So this has been a very, very engaged and important process. And it's reaching a very, very critical point where we're about to finalize the charter in today's assembly. Now, we are also at the same time commemorating and remembering June 16, 1976. This was a turning point in the history of the South African struggle. This was young people, children stepping up and challenging the might of the apartheid regime. They rocked our country, they also rocked our world, and they gave a spur to a mass movement of resistance that came to the fore in the 1980s. This is very similar to what we are seeing in the context of the George Floyd moment, where the whole question of Black lives and what it means has come to the fore, and it has opened up a historical shift and space for dramatic transformation. Of course, if we ask ourselves, have we changed the racialized hierarchies, the gendered hierarchies in our society? Have we transformed South Africa? I think the question still remains open. We are in a new context in which, while we challenge those historical legacies, we also have to take up that same spirit to confront a new dangerous contradiction, and that is the climate crisis. And joining us today to grapple with this issue is a new generation of young youth activists leading the climate struggle in our country. These are young people that have crossed the line. They have asked deep existential questions. They have asked deep political questions about the climate crisis, what it means for them as a generation, what it means for all of us living today on planet Earth and in South Africa and on the continent. And they have made serious sacrifices in taking up the struggle. So today's conversation will be a conversation with the past, but it will also be a conversation with those in the present that want to bring about transformation. We also have with us some of the leading climate scientists in South Africa. In my work as an academic at Wits University, I built up a very close collaboration through my project, the Emancipatory Future Study Project, with some of our leading climate scientists at Wits and who are some of the leading climate scientists in the country. And I've always tried to engage them around how do we bring climate science home? How do we take the consensus of climate science and ensure it's understandable to us here in South Africa? What does it mean to be a hotspot in the context of Southern Africa, in the context of the world? What does it mean to attribute uh, extreme climate events to climate science? And what does it mean, given the data we have, given the kind of trajectories we have for our future? So helping us today and launching today a very important document, which will be part of our climate agenda going forward, and which has always informed what we've been doing as climate justice activists, will be three of our leading climate scholars in the country, scientists. We also are living in a moment of dramatic change with COVID-19. COVID-19 in many ways has revealed underlying contradictions, fault lines, tensions running through our societies. It has also, in a sense, given us a glimpse of what happens when the red light is on and capitalism has to stop. It prompts us to think about what is important and how should we act as societies, as states, as power structures, and so on. And to help us grapple with this from an African perspective, from a global perspective, we also have leading climate justice activists. We have Nemo Basi from the continent, from Nigeria, who's been at the forefront of climate struggles in the Niger Delta, confronting powerful oil corporations for many, many decades. We have Dorothy Guerrero, formerly from the Philippines, also at the center of climate justice strategizing and politics. Dorothy is integral to the build-up now to the Glasgow summit, the COP summit that was postponed, and she'll also be engaging with us in this moment. We're also going to be culminating the dialogue around the Climate Justice Charter. This charter has been about what kind of systemic transformation do we want to be the content of the just transition in South Africa? What do movements want? What do people want? What do young people want? What do old people want? What do white people, black people, young and old want for transformation? And so today's conversation is to really crystallize out that charter. It's a compass for the next world we have to build, for the next kind of society we have to build. After this, we are taking it to Parliament, where we're going to claim our rights as citizens in terms of the Constitution. Section 234 of the Constitution gives us the right to have charters adopted to complement the South African Constitution. And we're hoping that many of you that have been part of this journey are going to go forward with us as we confront the rulers of this country with these ideas, with the science, and with the seriousness around this problem. Without further ado, I'm going to welcome everybody else who's joined us, and I'm going to hand over to our opening panel, which will be chaired by Courtney Morgan, and she'll give more detailed introductions to our younger panelists.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Vish. So as Vish has been saying, historically, South Africa has always had a very strong youth movement, and the climate justice movement is no different. This is fundamentally about intergenerational justice, our generational obligation to make sure there is a planet for the future generations to live on. We are so privileged to be joined by some of the leading young climate justice activists in the country. They are all doing things in their own environments, whether it's small, whether it's big. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but just to note that we will be keeping this session quite tight, because some exciting news is that some of these young activists will be going straight from their panel here to go and meet with Minister Barbara Creecy on some of the demands that they've made. So how the session will work is that I'm going to give a short intro to each of them, and then they will share with us lessons that they have learned, or they think we can learn from the 76 generation. And then we will get into the climate justice question. What do we need to do, and what does the climate crisis mean to them as young people? So that will be from 9 to 9:30, and then from 9:30 to 10, we will have a short Q&A with the audience. So if you guys can post questions in the chat, I will try and pick them up and pose them to the panelists. So just to introduce them very briefly, we've got Reisa, Manira, and Zahra, who are all high school students in Johannesburg. who have actually embarked on a school strike for climate, as well as some other projects within their personal capacity. We then have Faith from the Children's Resource Center in Cape Town, who has been doing amazing work with children. She's also done some activism around climate change as well as the water crisis. And then finally, we have Natalie, who is also a high school student in Johannesburg, involved with the collective movement, also doing climate justice work. So these are all very young high school young women. So it's really amazing to have you all here. So let's start off with what are the lessons that you all think we can learn from the generation of 76? Munira, do you want to start?
Good day, everybody. My name is Munira Katongale, and I'm a Pan-Africanist, and I mainly look at how we can use eco-development to propagate Pan-Africanist integration, and beyond that, achieve socio-economic and political independence for all countries on the continent. I think the most important lesson I've learned from the 7-6 generation is the importance of engaging all members of society. I understand that from the 7-6 generation, we have older people, we have Black people, we have white people, we have Indian people, and we also understand the intersectionality of issues and how we can come from all fronts to fight for something greater than all of us.
Thanks, Munira. Ray, do you want to go ahead? Raisa?
Hi, yes. Hello, my name is Raisa Nur Mohammed, and I'm a climate and human rights activist in Johannesburg. And one thing that we did the Soweto uprising in history this year, and one thing that I really, really admired was how united they were and how dedicated they were to their purpose and their cause. And they were so inclusive. And I think one thing we can take from that is how inclusive they were and how united they were. And yeah, it's so beautiful to see how so many students joined together to fight against the Bantu education system. And I think that's something that we can adopt, the unity to fight against the climate crisis.
Thanks, Ray. Faith from Cape Town, would you like to share with us your lessons from the 76 generation?
Good morning. Hello, good morning all. I'm Faith Chilias, a Girl Child movement member, and I agreed on all that Munira said. She basically mentioned everything that I wanted to say. So yeah, we must just get that spirit.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm a bit nervous.
No, that's fine. Don't worry.
Okay, then I'll be done. Because
Okay.
basically everything that I wanted to say, she mentioned most of it.
Okay, thank you. And then Zahra?
Hi everyone, my name is Zahra. I think what we can learn from the generation of 76 is that when there's a future that you're fighting for, it's up to the youth to fight for it. Because it's the older generation, those who are fighting, they will, but a lot of them don't think it's their responsibility because they're not the one that's going to be affected. But also that if you want to change something, you have to take drastic measures to be recognized and to change the entire system. Because as we've seen over and over again, governments don't respond to people actually suffering. Governments don't respond to asking nicely.
Thanks, Zahra. That was powerful. And Natalie, what are your lessons?
Hi. So we also did June 16th in history this year, and one thing I think that I found that really stood out for me was the role that Black consciousness played in the students' mobilization. And I think something interesting was that this greatly differed from, the previous generation's ideology with regards to how to deal with apartheid and how to represent themselves and view themselves. And I think that this is a lesson that's important for us to learn, because we also have to understand that we need to leave certain value systems, certain systems behind us, and we need to have a paradigm shift in the way we think about ourselves with regards to the rest of the world. And I think that that's a really important lesson for us to learn. And if they, did it so successfully, if they understood complete new ideology successfully, we can do it as well, and we can engage with the rest of society as well in inspiring them in a different way of thinking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. That was very quick. I think everyone's excited to get into the climate side of it. So I think that, I think you can actually all put your cameras on so we can see all of you, because now we're going to get into the climate section of it. Great. So amazing to have so many young women working in the climate justice movement. Okay, so let's get into the climate question. So what does the climate crisis mean to you as a young person, as a young woman in South Africa? Anyone? Munira, do you want to go first?
I shall. Thank you, Courtney. So my family is originally from Uganda, where they were subsistence farmers. And because they started seeing the implications of climate change in the form of less water and just poor crop yields, they fled as climate refugees to South Africa. So that's where I gained my understanding. And I think something very interesting is that even in my time, agriculture still remains something so integral and so important to African development. Agriculture is proven to be the sector with the greatest potential, but is also going to be greatly affected by climate change. So we're dealing with this great paradox. So for myself, my main interest has been looking at how we can empower women who are mostly working agriculture alongside furthering eco-development.
That's amazing. I think that's very in line with what a lot of people in this group will be looking at. So food sovereignty and the importance of changing our food system. So thank you, Munira, for that insight. Faith, would you like to talk to us about what the climate crisis means to you?
Okay, when I joined the children's movement, I learned more about respect yourself, respect others, and respect our environment. And and also the environment by building peace, friendship, and solidarity. So,
okay.
yeah.
Great. Thank you, Faith. I think solidarity is something that everyone here is very, very, we're all here for solidarity. All of our struggles are connected. So thank you for that, Faith. Natalie, would you like to talk to us about what the climate crisis means to you?
Hi. So for me, I think an important thing to understand, or what it means to me, the climate crisis, is that it's an amalgamation of everything that's currently wrong with our current way of life, with our current system. And I think it just shows that, we have to change something. So it's like this existential threat that's forcing us to re-look at the way we're living our lives and re-look at the systems we have in place, re-look at how, we engage with things like labor, we engage with things like education. And it's a chance for us to do better. And because it's an existential threat, like, we have to change and we have to make things better that are also sustainable. So things that will, live on into the future, that will be better for humanity. as a whole. And I think it's a chance for, the world to unite, because we've seen that the climate justice movement, especially with youth, is something that is known around the world. I'm sure all the youth activists here know other activists in other countries who are engaging with similar issues as we are. So it's also a chance for us to unite, in our new demands and our new hope for what we want in the future. So that's what the climate crisis and what climate justice means to me.
Thanks. Zahra?
I agree a lot with Natalie. I think that the climate crisis is a mechanism for us to see the tangible effects of the systems we have in place, like capitalism, etc. It's just a culmination of the way that we don't respect our environment, that we don't respect the things on this planet, because it's overshadowed by the need for profit, for profit, etc. So what it means to me is that once we address the climate crisis, once we understand the faults in our systems, we're able to have a mechanism going forward to fix those faults and to completely reconstruct what it means to live on this earth, but also completely take down the systems that have been in place for decades and centuries, that have been perpetuating this harm onto the planet and onto the people.
Thank you for that, Zahra. That's amazing. Ray, do you have anything to add about what it means to you?
I really liked Zahra's response about how it links to profit, because I think what the previous generations have done, instead of looking at how to preserve the earth, they've just been focused on how much profit they can get. And I think what draws me to the climate movement, at first what drew me to the climate movement was the fact that all the science was there. All the information was there, and I couldn't understand why businesses and governments weren't as worried about this. And then as I began learning more, the climate crisis, it goes so much further than climate. It's linked to so many things, linked to colonization and capitalism and profit. So I think what draws me into the climate movement is the intersectionality of it, and how and seeing how much the system has failed has led me to believe that a new system must be created in order to preserve the earth. And I think that's what I like, where I found my place in the climate movement.
Okay, thank you to all the speakers. I think we have kind of gotten into this discussion already. A lot of you mentioning capitalism, a lot of you mentioning system change. But maybe we can get a bit deeper into how do we actually deal with the climate crisis? What is necessary? What is necessary for the movement? How do we build this movement? And if any of you have looked at the charter, if you want to speak on a specific part of the charter, you can do that now. So Ray, we're just going to start with you again.
Cool. I looked at the charter, and what I really, really liked about it was how it linked to so many issues. It linked to xenophobia, and it linked to so many issues. And I think how we can solve the climate crisis isn't by looking at only climate. We need to look at everything wrong with the current system and see how everything is linked. And what I really liked about the charter is that it linked everything.
Okay, thanks. Zahra, do you have any insight into what we need to do, or anything about the charter that you'd like to add that you think is missing, or that you particularly liked about it?
I think that moving forward, one thing that we really have to look at specifically within South Africa is that how can we move forward sustainably while also creating jobs? So a lot of the argument for keeping the coal industry is that you have a lot of jobs within mining and as well within within like electricity and Eskom, right? And what happens to all of those people, especially because South Africa has such a high unemployment rate. So I think what needs to happen is, as we phase out coal, we also need to introduce renewable energies such as solar plants, hydro plants, windmills, and in all of those create new jobs that can actually be safer, but is also can actually employ even more people.
Okay, that's great. Faith, do you want to give your presentation on the charter and what you thought about it, or anything else you'd like to add?
Okay. In the Climate Justice Charter, I refer to the principles for deep just transitions. Okay. Under the point number 8, intergenerational justice, care for our planetary commons and ecosystem is crucial for intergenerational justice to secure a future for our children, youth, and those not yet born. We would like to highlight and challenge this statement to secure a future for our children, youth, and those not yet born. As a children's movement, we believe that the future for children is here and now. And unless children participate and contribute in all those issues that affect them, there is no future. So very important to note that we are here and now. This Climate Justice Charter must not just secure our future, but we must be active agents for all change throughout the process here and now. In March 2017, South Africa's total population was estimated at 56.5 million people, of whom 19.6 million were children under the age of 18. Children were therefore makes up 35% of the total population. Thus, 35% of our population must be active participants for deep justice transitions in order for this climate justice charter to be sustainable for generations to come. So as a children's movement, we say less talk and more action. That's it.
Thank you so much, Faith. I think that's an amazing point, especially we're always talking about youth, and often children are lost in that discussion. So I think that the importance of children as well as youth, I think, is something that we need to take forward. And I love the fact that you said the future is now, because that's exactly why we're here, because we need to take action now. So thank you so much for that, Faith. Munira, do you want to share what you've seen in the charter, or also just how does this movement look to you?
All right, so I just want to reminisce on Zahra's points a bit. What I really appreciated about the Climate Justice Charter and what the opening speaker said was that they engaged all members of society. And I think a lot of the time with certain issues, we've seen that the voice of marginalized groups have not been included, or as Faith said, children's voices have not been included. So I appreciate that the Climate Justice Charter has acknowledged how the climate crisis is going to affect different members of societies or different communities. And I also want to echo something that Natalie has once said, which was so powerful for me, and that's climate justice isn't climate justice if it's not pro-Black or feminist. So I think the Climate Justice Charter has really looked at how we can use pro-equality or egalitarianism to solve the climate crisis.
Thanks, Munira. So Natalie, I'm going to bring you in now. So Munira has touched on a point that you make. I also just want to point out that Natalie is one of the young people who has been part of this process for a while, and she was at our youth dialogue, as far as I remember, and some other climate movements that we've had, climate conferences that we've had. So we're happy to have Natalie back in the space. Can you talk to us about the charter and maybe even touch on the points that Munira has pointed to?
So hi, thank you also for having me back. I love this space. Okay, so I think the two things that really stood out for me from the charter were, in the beginning, the two goals that that it set out there were a lot of goals, but the two goals that specifically stood out was number 3, which said to inspire a break with old thinking that caused the crisis, which reinforces the current paradigms of growth, progress, and conquest. And then number 5, which says to overcome the crisis of political leadership, which is incapable of thinking beyond business as usual and dominant ways of thinking. And I think the reason why, and certainly throughout the charter, it encompasses these two goals with regards to changing old ways and bringing in new things like democratizing water comms and having a basic income grant and having like socially owned renewable energy. Like those are all really brand new ideas, and we can see how beneficial those would be. And they certainly break with the old idea of we need to make profit. Like it's a completely new way of thinking. It's as opposed to prioritizing profit, we're prioritizing how many people can we help. And I think that links into the point that Munira said, the thing that I once said, which is that climate justice is not climate justice if it's not pro-Black and if it's not pro-feminist, and if it's not pro, anyone who is currently, down because of the current system. The reason being is that climate justice needs to be used as a tool to gain social justice and justice in every respect. So that means that in South Africa, if we're talking specifically here, we know that refugees were not allowed to get aid from, the COVID-19 aid during COVID-19. And that's an issue because obviously now people don't have the ability to feed themselves. So if we want to talk about climate justice, we need to see how can we specifically help, say, refugees in South Africa? How can we specifically help foreign nationals? How can we specifically help Black people? How can we specifically help women? And how can we use climate justice as a tool to empower those people? And I think the Climate Justice Charter, deals with that to a huge extent because it talks about, decoloniality and, how we need to, like I said, how we need to have a basic income grant, how we need to reorganize through food sovereignty, all these different things that look at how can we put sustainable measures in place that are going to lead to climate justice that also ensure that people can be empowered. And I think that's a really great thing about the Climate Justice Charter. Thank you.
Okay, wow, thank you so much to all of you. That's the end of my questions. Just want to say again that you guys are all amazing. You guys are doing amazing work. And definitely when I was in high school, I was not able to speak on social issues the way that all of you have. So well done to that. And keep doing what you're doing as young people, as young women in your spaces. I tell you guys all the time, but I'm very, very proud of you all. So we're going to start taking questions from the audience now. I haven't seen any questions apart from just one. So there was one question particularly for Munira, but anyone can answer this after Munira does. But this question was from Sid, and he is pointing to your idea of Panism, and he's saying that your commitment to Pan-Africanism, does that mean that you are also committed to the idea of a nation state? So this is just to give some background to this question. There are a lot of groups who don't prescribe to that way of that formation of people. So they, for example, the Rajava movement, not a nation state, but they are.
All right. I really pay respects to some of our leading African or some of our African legends or leaders who kind of paved Africa or independence for many African countries, such as what do we call him? His name was, sorry, I just lost his name, but yeah, and I think I really, for me, for example, if we look at something like the European Union, we see how the European Union has so much economic development and so much political togetherness. And I think if Africa is able to unite itself in that front, seeing as we share a similar history, I think that could turn into really tangible economic and political independence for all countries. And I just think that as a world, as a society, it's very important to be united.
Okay, great. Thank you, Munira. Just before we go to some of the other questions that are flying through on the chat, I'd like to go back to Faith for her to share, and maybe all of you could do this, just to share more about your actual climate activities that you've been involved in, because I think all of you have done real work on the ground in terms of climate action. So Faith, do you just want to tell us some more about your activism and what the Children's Resource Center has been doing? I think you're still on mute, Faith.
Sorry. Okay.
No problem.
As a children's movement, we have already been actively involved in putting systemic alternatives for transformative change in place, and even through its stand on a small scale, we believe if we invest in the potential of children and build solidarity by joining the forces of children as active participants, the outcome will contribute to sustaining the vision of the climate justice charter for generations to come. Some highlights of our action: we are making and promoting the use of wonder bags as an energy-saving alternative, reducing and the use of electricity. Our vision is for each child to receive a wonder bag, ensuring each household has to use the wonder bag. Also to establish 16 children's community food gardens nationally. We're also manufacturing of reusable washable sanitary towels for girls, which is a sustainable resource allowing girls to wash and reuse them rather than having to buy disposable sanitary towels every month. In addition, they are inexpensive and environmentally friendly. Our attempt to transform the minds of our Girl Child members nationally as agents for the change to use reusable washable sanitary towels will contribute to the environment preservation and by reducing 300 sold disposable sanitary towels per girl, women per year that will end up in landfills. The social benefits of this concept can greatly reduce the environmental impact. Manufacturing our reusable shopping bags to replace the use of plastic bags. We are making squeeze bottles to reduce water waste and to ensure clean running water when children wash their hands, which is an important activity in our movement even before COVID-19 as part of our ongoing Clean and Safe Lives campaign. The children movement responded to COVID-19 hunger crisis relief by contributing the children's community feeding kitchens, providing home meals for children coordinated by children. The feeding kitchens were rolled out as a pilot in 14 to 17 children's community groups, covering 4 to 9 provinces within 14 locations nationally. And we also have promotion and awareness about the eco-literacy and the environmental justice form part of our educational process. These are some small initiatives. We are committed to take to a bigger scale with the mass active participants of children and youth. The time for children and youth to develop a relationship with all respect for our natural environment and sensitivity for the need to protect the natural resources is here and now. Forward to the climate justice. Forward. Thank you.
Forward. Thank you, Faith. That's amazing. Yeah, the Children's Resource Center has been doing some amazing work pre-COVID and during COVID. Some of their feeding schemes have really, Comrade Shanaz from CRC has been sending us pictures, and you guys are really doing an amazing job for children and for young people. So thank you for the work that you do. So just to get back to the questions, I think, so thank you so much for that, Faith. So one of the questions that's also on my mind. So I think a lot of you will, or just have turned 18 or will be turning 18 in the next couple of years. What is your opinion on the vote? How can we use our vote to make changes, and what is the importance, and how do we go beyond the vote? Do we need to go beyond the vote? Anyone can come in.
I'd say as important as it is to vote, I think we equally need to participate in the policy making process itself. So if we vote for a certain party, are we holding them accountable firstly? And secondly, in terms of their policies or just their governance, are we engaging with that process? For me, I think so important to development is what strategic policies we are using, and if we're seeing any errors, if we're seeing any gaps, are we bridging those gaps? So for me, like, something I want to emphasize is that it's not just about political parties. When it comes to development, it's also about us being active and engaging citizens.
Okay, thanks. Raisa, I know that you've just turned 18. How do you feel you can use your vote to make sure that there are leaders who are going to listen to you?
I think what Munira said was very important, that as important as it is to vote, we also need to engage with the policy making. And I think that's something that isn't talked about enough, because as we engage in the policy making, we see what the party stands for, and we see and we can comment, and sometimes, if needs be, we can call them out. And with voting, I believe that voting is incredibly important, because if you are given a chance to change something in society, you should use it. But after engaging with a lot of people don't know, feel very hopeless with regards to their vote. Some of them just don't vote because they don't know who to vote for, because they feel so left behind by the government. They don't see the point in voting. So as much as I believe the vote is important, I think we really need to engage to ensure that the parties are engaging with people, because so many South Africans feel so left behind by the current government and some of the other parties. And I think that what Munira brought up is so important, as we can't leave anybody who is part of the process, and who is part of the process is anyone who can vote. We cannot leave any of them behind.
Hey, Natalie, I know you're also in matric, so do you want to speak more about voting? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So we were actually talking about this in class earlier this year, and I think, like, one thing that I've kind of understood with my vote is that a lot of people say that they, like Marisa was saying, they don't want to vote because they don't feel that any party particularly agrees with them. But I think maybe I also kind of fall into this category, but I'm still going to use my vote, even if it's just voting. In fact, I'm going to use it to vote for an opposition party, like the EFF, or like a smaller party, because what that can do is that can challenge the current, government to do better. So if we have this, so even though maybe my vote isn't going to change the majority rule or anything like that, by voting for an opposition party, I can ensure that the government, that the current, majority rule is going to be challenged to do their work properly, especially if I vote for a party that I know constantly challenges the government on important points. So I think, yeah, even though you can't certainly guarantee anything, I think it is important maybe to use your vote in that sense, even if there isn't a particular party that you completely agree with. I also agree with what Munira and Raisa were saying about, being engaged in policy-making processes, because I do think that really is an important part of, governmental work, and it's something that we need to be a part of and we need to speak to. So yes.
Thanks. I think that's a great input from all of you. Does anyone else want to come in? I know the rest of you are a bit younger, but do you want to come in about voting or anything about that?
Just to add on shortly from what Natalie said, because I think she said a lot of what I wanted to. When we're voting, especially when there's no clear party that represents everyone or represents everything that you want to stand for, I think we need to ask why are we voting? So is it to get that party into power? Is it to create an opposition? Or is it just to get a representative into parliament to voice what you're saying? So even if that doesn't account to anything, but what's the value of discourse within parliament, and what's the value of that issue just being present?
Okay, thanks for that. So one of the other questions, again, to the audience, you can post your questions in the chat line. I am kind of trying to look through them. So another one of the questions was around people's own perspectives. So all of you spoke about capitalism, and although this is a system, there are people who themselves value their own profit or their own greed over the greater good, or over, as a lot of you have put it, solidarity. So what do we need to do to shift people's perspectives, to try and shift them to start thinking about people, to start thinking about their fellow South Africans, their fellow people who live on earth with them, their environment? How do we actually make sure that those people who value their own profit, how do we get to them? Again, anyone can come in.
So what I feel about this is we can't make them do anything. If they're gaining so much profit, no one gets to that point fairly and without stepping on other people. And we can't make them start caring, but we can ensure that, like through policy making, we can ensure that they can't keep so much of their profit, and they can't continue to exploit the environment and other people. So I feel like through policy making and laws and rules, ensuring that no one collects that much money through exploitation. And I think that's one way to get to those people.
Yeah. I'd also like to echo on what Raisa said. I think in capitalism, in the capitalist system, people who aren't necessarily the exploiters, or rather people who are the working class, have some kind of power. I think if we see that products aren't eco-friendly, or if companies are exploiting workers in general, we can boycott those certain certain products that these companies are producing. So I think people, as the majority of the working class, have some kind of power in terms of challenging the capitalist system. And just again with what Ray said, like, we really need to hold them accountable. I don't know how much longer we can continue to try and plead and ask, because this system has gone on for 400 years. So yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thanks, Munira. Does anyone else want to add to that?
I don't think that we're going to be able to appeal to the people exploiting, because I think we've tried. They know what they're doing wrong. It's just the fact of they don't care. I think then it's up to government, whose obligation it is to protect people, to then either put in policies or just tax the rich.
Okay, thanks. Faith or Natalie, do you have anything to add before we move on to the next question? No. Okay, cool. So the next question is particularly for you as students. So a lot of people in the chat want to know, what is the perspective of your peers? So I think at this point, those who are doing school strikes and action at your school, maybe just tell us a bit more about what you're doing at school, and what exactly, how do your peers take it? Are they on board? And how do we get to more young people? How do we spread this message that you guys are telling? How do we make sure that other young people are on the same page? And linked to that also is, have you seen any change in your curriculum, in your actual school, like what they're teaching you? Have you seen any change in terms of maybe even the mention of climate justice, how they teach climate change? Essentially, what is your school experience, both institutionally, but also with your friends, with your peers? Natalie, do you want to go first? I see you shaking your head, so I think let's bring you in.
Yeah, so my personal experience at my school. So I actually started off with my activism at my school because I was part of the Enviro Club, and then someone told me about Greta Thunberg last year, and I was like, okay, we should have a march. So the first 2 marches that I organized were at my school, and in the beginning, like I would go up to assembly and it was a whole Enviro Club that was organizing this march. So we would say, like, guys, this is what's going on, like, don't you want to come? And I think a lot of people, especially in the beginning, didn't really engage with it. They thought, oh, it's silly, or it didn't appeal to everyone. So we had very low turnout. But I think this year, gradually, as I also started to become more and more, like, I got a greater understanding of what the climate crisis is and what climate justice is, I was able to better, understand how important intersectionality is in it. And then I think, that changed with regards to how people responded to me at school, because instead of saying, hey guys, like, we're all gonna die soon, I would say, hey guys, look, there's this thing that's happening that's a result of this and this. It's a legacy of colonialism. It challenges people getting, social justice. And gradually through that, people began to be more engaged with it because it became something that they could better relate to and better understand. Because, climate justice isn't just about the icebergs melting. Climate justice is about the people who are going to suffer as a result of, more frequent and more disastrous natural disasters. It's also about the people who are currently not getting accurate justice because they're working for these, carbon criminals. And I think once you start talking to that, more of the youth, at least in my school, definitely began to understand it better and identify more with climate justice and became a lot more interested in it. And it also, like, in my personal space with my friends, I think it also became like a completely different topic of conversation. So it wasn't just something that we spoke about every now and again. It became integrated with other things that we spoke about because, a lot of people in my friendship groups, and then I think, like, at school at large, the youth of today are very politicized. They are politicized. They want to engage with these systems. So I think gradually, when we start speaking about climate justice more intersectional way, more youth engage with it. In terms of the curriculum, so I did one thing in my entire high school career with climate justice, which was in grade 8 when we calculated our carbon footprint. Other than that, there was nothing that I'm aware of that was, taught to us. It was also, that was something that our teacher did. She took her own initiative to do that, to educate us about the climate crisis. It wasn't something that was in the curriculum. I'm not sure what it is now because, like I said, we did that when we were in grade 8. I don't think there have been any changes to the curriculum, the IEB curriculum that I know of. So I think that definitely is still a problem. We do need to engage with climate justice. And I think it shouldn't just be in geography, because that's where I did it. I think it should be part of, life orientation. It should be part of history when we learn about colonialism. It should be part of, like, everything. Like, because climate justice is so intersectional, we need to learn about how it happened, and we need to learn about how it's going to affect South Africa specifically. So yes.
Thanks, Natalie. Ray, do you want to talk a bit more about school boycotts and just very quickly on, your perspectives at school and with your peers?
So for me, because this year I started boycotting school in a demand for the Department of Environmental Affairs to declare climate emergency. I did this with Zahra and Munira. And for me, my focus wasn't on getting more students in because it's a lot to ask. And generally when you start demanding people to do drastic things to care, they don't want to, and they start turning against the movement. And also I recognize that I am so incredibly privileged to be able to boycott school because I'm able to catch up, and like I have the means to catch up and get extra help. And so I feel like it's a very unfair position that previous generations have put youth into, because while their youth was filled with school and all their interests, the youth of today have been placed into a position where we are trying to create a future for ourselves. And I feel like in South Africa specifically, I feel like it's so unfair to expect youth to care as much as I do, because they're not in a position to do that. But while I say this, the curriculum, I think the CAPS curriculum has a little bit more than the IEB curriculum in regards to to climate change, but they touch on it very basically. Like I take geography, and so many, like through my knowledge of the climate crisis in these spaces, I can see how much what we learn in geography relates to the climate crisis, but it's not being taught in school. And in life orientation and other subjects, they don't teach us about the roots of climate change, and they don't teach us about the actual problems. Instead, they tell us that we need to alter our behavior, which is true to an extent, but also doesn't acknowledge the fact that it's not the ordinary people who are at fault, and diverts the blame. And so yes, the response from the youth about my boycott, it's been very varied. Some people don't understand how I can risk so much of my matric, and other people say that they want to join but can't. So I feel like there's so many different ways to do activism, and yeah, activism can also be just support.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a very good point that you're making, Raisa, as well, that activism comes in so many forms, and you don't have to be boycotting with Ray to support her and to be in solidarity with her. Does anyone else want to add before we move on to some other questions? We are running out of time. I don't want to let you be late for your meeting with the minister. So I'm just going to take 2 more questions. To those who are raising their hands, I just want to reiterate, we want the questions in the chat. We do want to hear your voices and to engage, but there's just way too many people for us to do that at this point. At the end of the assembly, when we engage on the charter, we will open it up to people's hands, and we will hear your voices. But for now, please, please put your points in the chat. So does anyone else want to add to that to the curriculum issue?
Yeah, I'd just like to quickly add, in terms of the curriculum, I'm not a geography student. So for that reason, I haven't been able to engage with climate change and other subjects. And climate change, as Natalie and Raisa said, is so intersectional, and it should be something we're looking at in every single topic, whether this be history, English, or life orientation. For me, I just feel like in terms of our education, in terms of our curriculum, climate change has just been slapped in and not holistically integrated. So like this year, we just did plastic recycling, and that was the content on climate change for the whole year. So yeah, I don't think we're being equipped to understand the climate catastrophe and how we can play our part.
Okay. Thank you for that. So my second last question is, all of you mentioned unity. And what is the significance of, number one, unity across political parties? Because obviously that's something that very often, and especially once you get into the university space, is something that does divide the youth movement. So what is the importance of, first, unity across political lines, but also unity across urban and rural? How do we shrink that divide? How do we make sure that the urban is listening to the rural, or the rural is listening to the urban, and that we have unity across all of these lines. Because as all of you mentioned, that's the only way we're going to build this movement. So just, yeah, quick points on unity.
I think it's about accessibility, especially when talking about intersecting between rural and urban. And I think that also comes a lot with the narrative surrounding climate change, because currently the narrative is very, people view it as a very like white people problem, like a West problem, seeing it as something that is not actually affecting people. So I think the first step we need to take is like bridging that gap and showing people how it intersects, and from there making it accessible to everyone, because only having voices from kids who go to like Model C schools or private schools, that's not really going to help us, especially in South Africa with the diverse amount of people, with the diversity that we have, and the amount of people that we have. So I think we need to have open communications, but also understand, even though people's approaches to climate change are very different, like some people are very, have more like radical approaches of like systematic change, while others just like want to like do what they can. I think even though those can exist on the same spectrum, we need to move forward together, and they can all be encompassed within the same movement.
Great, thank you. Munira, Ray, Natalie, Faith, any other points on unity? I think accessibility is a big one.
Yeah, I think also we need to acknowledge that everybody has both a place in the struggle and a place in the liberation. So as Zahra was saying, it's viewed as such a Western issue, but at the same time, I think as Africans, or more specifically Black women, we've just been overwhelmed with so many issues ranging from racial issues to gender issues, and exclusion. So I think we need to really make a point of reaching all kinds of communities, understanding the indigenous knowledge, understanding their challenges and how that could link to opportunities in climate justice.
Okay, thank you, Munira. Ray, Faith, Natalie, is Natalie still here? I think she might have dropped off. Okay.
Yeah. So, regards to unity, I think it's only natural for there to be some disagreements within different people. Like some people, like you said, some people want a more radical approach. Some people are more conservative, but it's so important to present a united front, because industries and governments, they see the divides and they take advantage of the divides. So I feel like it's so important to present a united front, but also acknowledge that there are differences, and instead of getting angry about differences, which so many people do, you have to speak through them and acknowledge them, and acknowledge the fact that you're not always going to be right in everything, and your approach isn't always going to be good. So I think, and with that, as important as it, like now I'm transcending beyond South Africa, as important as it is to be united with the world, I feel like it's important for Africa to take a step back from the West and start being united with other African countries, and start depending less on the West, and start being more united with each other, and start trading within each other and helping build other African countries grow. Because one legacy of colonization is that the growth of African countries results in the growth of European countries. And I think that such an important part of unity is unifying Africa and taking a step back from the West, who cause so many of the problems that we are facing today. I think you're muted, Courtney.
Sorry. Are there any other final points before I ask? I just have one final question for all of you. Okay, so I'm going to ask each of you this. This comes from the chat. So this, and you can put in your closing remarks in this because we've just got 6 minutes left of the session. So just one sentence, if you could be president tomorrow, what would be your first order as president? Zahra, let's go with you.
That's a really hard one. I think it would be holding accountability to the images that we see now, and from that being able to move forward with like new sustainable measures.
Okay, so holding the biggest polluters accountable. Great. Munira?
Yeah, I think mine will be similar to Ray. I don't know, some might see this as a bit radical, but I think that would be demanding reparations not only from the colonial powers, but also from our large carbon emitting industries to fund eco-development projects.
Okay, Ray?
So I think that if I were to become president tomorrow, I think before I make any decisions, I will look at my own party and who makes up the party, and I think the first thing I do is become more inclusive. So before I make any decisions, get people from all levels of society part of the decision making, and because to become truly democratic, you've got to get the opinion of all levels of society, which is currently not being done. So I think that's the first thing I'll do, become more inclusive.
Okay, that's powerful. Faith, do you have any ideas? What would be your first order that you make as president?
If I become president, I will implement this climate justice charter.
Wow, thank you. Great. Thank you, Faith. Natalie, I see that you're back. Great. Okay. So just before you guys have to leave, my last question was weaved in with your closing remarks. What would you, if you were made president tomorrow, Natalie, what would be your first order? So we've had implement the climate justice charter, we've had make a more inclusive government, and we've had amazing inputs from Zahra and Munira as well about holding the emitters accountable and reparations from colonialism as well as from the emitters. So Natalie, what's yours?
So I think personally what I would do if I was made president tomorrow is I would declare climate emergency, because that would give me like a lot of power to just put stuff in without having it to take 2 years. Like we know the climate change bill sitting there waiting to be turned into legislation since like 2 years ago. So I think, yeah, I would declare climate emergency. And then I guess I would also do what everyone else has said. I would make colonial powers give us reparations. I would hold the biggest emitters accountable. And I would also put the climate justice charter, in place with, next to our constitution. So like, yeah, all of that. Yes.
Amazing. So yeah, that is the end of our session. I just want to open it up to the panelists one last time. If you have any closing remarks, you can say them now. But yeah, do you guys have any closing remarks? No? Oh, Munira?
I just want to say that this was touched on a lot, but just again, so important to be inclusive, so important to present a united front, and so important to work with urgency, with conviction, with determination. And I'm so glad to be part of this movement that is like one of the most inclusive movements. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the future.
Thank you so much, Munira. I also, just from me, I want to once again say how proud we are of all of you. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. Thank you for being inclusive. Thank you, for giving us hope for the youth. And with that, I'd like to say good luck for your meeting with the minister. I hope it goes well. And yeah, be strong. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you so much for inviting us. I just want to take a picture for myself quickly. Thank you so much for having us. I really loved
Sure,
this.
and enjoy the rest of your youth day. So everyone else, don't go anywhere else. We now have a very exciting panel on a launch of a brand new science document. So I'm now going to hand over to Ferial, who is the chair for the next session. Thank you all for listening. And thank you to our panelists, Natalie, Raisa, Faith, Zahra, Munira. Thank you so much.